Sulla owned Rome for 6 days before his men came for me, and I spent every one of them waiting for the sound of boots. It is a particular sound, a hobnailed boot on stone in step with a dozen others, and once you have heard it come up a street toward a door you never mistake it for anything else again. The city had gone quiet under it, not peaceful, quiet the way a dog goes quiet when a bigger dog walks into the yard. Sulla had marched 6 legions across a boundary no army had crossed in 800 years, and the gods had done nothing, and every man in Rome had watched them do nothing and drawn the same conclusion. The old rules were over. The new ones were written on boards in the forum. I had gone to read the boards on the second day, with my hood up like half the city. They were lists. Names of men declared enemies, their lives forfeit, their heads worth coin, their houses and land forfeit to the state, which meant, everyone understood, forfeit to whoever stood closest when the owner fell. Sulpicius, who had started it all, was near the top and already dead, betrayed by his own slave, whom Sulla freed for the tip and then hurled off the Tarpeian rock for betraying a master. That told you what kind of order had come to Rome. Marius's name was there. And lower, among the small names nobody bothered to read aloud, was one I knew better than my own, Varenius. I had told myself small fish get overlooked while the nets go after the big names. That was the mistake. I owned a hill that turned water into stone, and a hill does not swim away. A name on a kill list is never really about the man, it is about everything he owns and cannot carry when he runs. They came on the 6th morning before light, and they had a guide. I heard the boots and I was already awake, because I had not really slept in 6 days, and I came off the pallet with the wooden sword grip in my hand out of pure animal habit. 3 months of Titus breaking me before dawn had put that much into the meat of me, if nothing else yet. Titus was up before I was. The old soldier slept the way old soldiers sleep, which is to say not at all and all at once, and he had the door braced and the men moving before I had the sleep out of my eyes. Backstair, now, Rullus the yard boy behind me, and stay there till I say. I did not stay behind him. That is the first thing I want to set down about that morning, because it is the first thing that was different. In the Subura, 4 weeks before, I had gone into a fight and been a passenger in it, a thing my men carried while they bled. This time, when the door came in, and it came in fast, a squad boot putting the bar through its own bracket in one kick, I was standing in the front room with the rest of them, and my body did not freeze. There were 8 of them in the doorway, hard men in the padded tunics, soldiers, where under armor they had not bothered to put on for a night's work on a boy. And in front of them, keeping well back from the door himself, pointing me out with one thick finger like a man pointing out a horse he means to buy, was Rufus Scipio. That one, the dark one with the nose, that's the Varenius. Take him, and the hill's paperwork's as good as signed. So it was Scipio. Of course it was Scipio. I had beaten him in front of 100 men on a wharf and let him walk away cursing, and I had told myself it was mercy and it had been laziness, and here was the bill for it, arriving with soldiers at my door before dawn. I filed that. Then the first man came through, and there was no more time for filing. He came at me because I was the one Scipio had pointed at, and he came the way men come who have done this 100 times and expect it to go the usual way, fast, contemptuous, one hand out to grab a fistful of tunic and haul me down. And I did the thing Titus had made me do 10,000 times in the gray mornings until I hated him, and then until I stopped thinking about it at all. I did not grab back. I moved my feet. I stepped off his line the way you step off the line of a cart that cannot stop, and his grab closed on air, and his own weight carried him a half step past me, and for one moment his ribs were open to me and I was standing balanced instead of falling. I hit him there under the short ribs with everything my hips could give it, the way you drive a maul and not the way you throw a punch. He folded. It astonished me. It astonished him more. A month ago I could not have moved a fallen mule. I still could not have out-wrestled this man for a heartbeat. But Titus had not been teaching me to wrestle. He had been teaching me to not be where the blow was, and to put my small weight into one honest place when the chance came, and it worked. It actually worked. and the man who had expected to drag a drunk son across a floor sat down hard against the wall with no breath in him. I did not have time to be proud of it. Titus put the second man down with the flat of a mixing paddle across the knee and the third across the jaw on the backswing, and Rullus came through from the yard behind them with his shovel and his black shoulder and the cold economy of a big man who has decided. And for about 10 seconds my front room was the ugliest kind of work, wood on padded flesh, no room to swing, men grunting, someone screaming about a knee. We were 9 and a soldier. They were 8 and a fat freedman. In a closed room, at arm's length, with surprise gone the instant the door broke, that was very nearly even, and even was more than I had any right to. But it could not stay even, because behind these 8 was a legion, and a man who fights a legion in his own front room and wins has only won the right to be killed properly in the street. Titus knew it before I did. He always knows it first. That's enough one. Go, backstair, the roofs, the subura, we do not hold this house, boy, the house is already lost, the house was lost the day your name went on the board. Move your feet. We went. Out the back, up onto the low roofs the poor of the Esquiline build almost close enough to step between, Rullus hauling me across a gap my arms could not have made alone, the whole insula waking around us and nobody opening a shutter, because in an occupied city you do not open your shutter for the sound of soldiers. You thank your gods it is someone else's door. Below us I heard them take the house. I heard Scipio's voice, high and pleased, telling someone in authority that the Varenius operation, the hill, the mortar, the whole grey fortune, was crown property now under the proscription, and that he, Rufus Scipio, had been the loyal citizen who delivered it, and expected to be remembered when the estates were parceled out. That was the moment I understood the whole of what had been done to me, and I understood it running across a rooftop in my nightclothes with a stranger's blood on my knuckles. I was not on that list because I had loved Marius, though I had. I was on it because a hill that makes stone from water is worth killing for, and the kindest, cleanest, most lawful way to kill a man for what he owns is to have the state do it and call it order. Someone cleverer than Scipio had seen my name and my hill and done the sum. Scipio was only the finger that pointed. We went aground at the bottom of the subura, in a dyer's cellar that stank of stale piss and old wool, that a man Titus had once soldiered beside opened to us without a word and closed behind us without a question. 9 men, a soldier and me, breathing hard in the dark, everything I had built in a year taken between the 4th watch and dawn. And here is the strange thing, the thing I turned over in that reeking cellar while my knuckles stiffened and swelled. I was not despairing. I checked for it, the way you check a tooth with your tongue, and it was not there. Something else was there instead, something I had not felt since I woke on that floor a year ago, and it took me a while in the dark to name it because I had spent a whole year on the back foot and had forgotten the taste of the front one. I had hit a man and he had gone down. For a year Rome had done things to me and I had survived them, cleverly, expensively, one loss at a time. This morning, for about 10 honest seconds, I had done something to Rome and it had worked, and my hands had learned to do it while I was not looking. They had taken my house and my hill and left me alive with 9 men who had chosen to run into soldiers for me. That was a mistake. They should have killed me in that room. You do not leave a man alive who has just found out, at the worst possible moment, that he is no longer entirely helpless, and who has, at last, a very great deal to be angry about. I had spent a year learning to survive being hunted. I was done with that. In the dark of the dyer's cellar, with my house being looted over my head, I stopped planning how to hide and started planning how to hunt. You cannot hunt a man you cannot name, and for 2 days I did not have a name. I had a hill someone wanted and a fat freedman who had pointed at my door, and that was all. So I made myself do the cold thing first, which was to understand the machine before I reached into it. A proscription is not a murder. A murder is hot and simple and leaves a body someone might avenge. A proscription is paperwork. Sulla had turned killing into a clerk's trade. A name goes on a board, and from that hour the man is not a man. He is an estate with legs, and any citizen may take his head for 2 talents of silver, and any citizen may lay claim to his land, and the law will smile on both. It runs on greed, which is the only fuel that never runs short in this city. And it had one seam in it, one thing I could set my thumb into, and it was this: Sulla did not mean to stay. Everyone in Rome knew he had a war waiting in the east, a king drowning in gold, and that the moment he had the city nailed down he would sail for it and be gone for years. His terror had a clock on it. I did not have to survive forever. I had to survive him and then win while the winning was cheap. But first, the name. And here I learned that a network is not a place, it is a habit, and habits outlive the men who leave. Varenia was 2 days east in the hills and safe, and I had thought her ears went with her. They did not. On the 3rd morning, a dyer's girl brought down a twist of cloth with a sewing needle stuck through it, and a scrap of word that had come hand to hand across the whole city out of the one set of rooms the soldiers never watched, from Orlia, who had heard it at a loom in a great house and sent it into the dark to a proscribed man at real risk to her own neck, and who I would think about later, when I had time to think about anything but staying alive. The word was a name, Aulus Curtius, a knight. Not a soldier, not a senator, a man of the middle sort with an eye for a ledger, who had looked at the chaos of the proscriptions the way a good factor looks at a shipwreck, and seen not a tragedy but an inventory. He had made himself one of the men Sulla used to turn names into money. He ran the seizures, valued the estates, took the state's cut, and I was to learn a larger cut the state never saw. He had priced my hill. He had understood, as Bashus once did, exactly what gray stone that sets in water is worth. And he had done the simplest thing a clever man can do to acquire a thing he cannot buy. He had put its owner on a list of the dead. I had to see him. You cannot appraise a man on hearsay, and I do not move against what I have not weighed. So on the 4th day I went out with Rullus, both of us in a dyer's stained rags with our faces grimed, into a city I was now a ghost in, to watch Aulus Curtius work. We found him 3 streets over, taking a house. It belonged to a wine merchant whose only crime, as far as anyone in the crowd could say, was that his name rhymed closely enough with a real enemy's that no one had troubled to check. Curtius stood in the man's atrium with a wax tablet, and he was not cruel about it, which was the worst of it. He was efficient. A clerk beside him called out the value of things, and Curtius wrote them down: the couches, the plate, the slaves, the little household gods, while the merchant's wife stood against a wall with her children and made no sound, having already learned that sound bought nothing here. 2 of Curtius's hired men carried a covered thing out to a cart, and it was the shape of a man, and it was the merchant, and a 3rd man was cleaning something on his sleeve as he walked. 2 talents, paperwork. I appraised Curtius across that atrium over the head of a weeping woman, and the bronze told me the thing I had come to find. Aulus Curtius, knight, proscription agent, reckoning 61, cunning 58, steals more than he declares, threat, EI, steals more than he declares. There it was. He was not Crassus. The ledger did not flinch printing his number. He was a clever, greedy man of the middling sort, and clever, greedy men of the middling sort have a weakness that the truly dangerous do not. They cheat, and a cheat can be caught. He was taking a private cut off the top of every estate he seized, skimming the dead before the state could count them, and if he was stealing from Sulla's treasury while he did Sulla's killing, then somewhere Aulus Curtius kept a second ledger, a real one, that would hang him higher than he had hung the wine merchant. I did not need to fight his soldiers. I needed his second ledger. I was still holding that thought when a boy in the crowd looked at me twice. He was one of Scipio's. I knew the face from the wharf, from 100 years ago last month, and he looked at the grimed dyer in the crowd, and I watched the recognition come up in him slow and then all at once, and he opened his mouth to shout, and Rullus hit him in the throat before the shout got out. But the movement did it. 2 of Curtius's men saw a big man drop a boy at the edge of their crowd, and then we were running. I will not pretend it was clever. It was a flat run through the Subura at midday, the pair of us shoving through fishwives and porters, appending a barrow of something that stank, the shouts building behind us into that particular baying a crowd makes when it has been promised a reward for a head. A hand got a fist in my rags at the mouth of the fish market, and for half a heartbeat I was taken, and then the drills answered before my thinking did. I turned into the grip instead of away from it, the way Titus had bruised into me 100 cold mornings, felt the hold go slack when I stopped pulling against it, and drove my elbow back into the man's face the way you swing a heavy gate shut. Something in his nose gave. He let go of my rags to hold his own face, and I was gone before he finished falling, and I did not have time to marvel at it, but a small cold clerk in the back of my skull wrote it down. That is twice now in 1 week that this body did what I asked it. Rullus went one way at a fountain and I went the other, the way we had agreed in the cellar precisely so that no one moment could take both of us. And I went up over a wall I could not have climbed a season ago, my hands and my legs doing work the drink had once made impossible, onto the close roofs. I lay flat in a gutter with my heart slamming, and my own blood loud in my ears while the hunt poured through the street below. One of them came up after me, a young one, scrambling onto the tiles not 10 feet off, close enough that I could hear him breathe, and he stood there turning in the sun, looking out across the roofs and not down at the man lying in the gutter under his own hooded rags, and after a long age he swore and dropped back down into the street. I did not move until the light changed. Rullus did not get away clean. He led 3 of them off me and lost them in the tanneries, but he took a knife along the ribs doing it, a long shallow tear that he would not let anyone touch for 2 days out of pure stubbornness, until it went hot and Titus held him down and cleaned it while he swore. He had spent his own blood to keep me off a hook again, and said nothing about it again. I was collecting a debt to that man I did not know how I would ever pay. That night in the cellar, I laid it out for the 9 of them, because they had run into soldiers for me twice now and had earned the right to hear a plan instead of an order. We were not going to hide until Sulla sailed. Hiding was losing slowly, and I was tired of losing slowly. We were going to take Aulus Curtius's second ledger, the private book where a greedy man writes down everything he has stolen from the man who licensed him to steal, and we were going to use it to unmake the thing he had made, my name on a board, and to break him with the same law he had used to break the wine merchant. A cheat is not brought down by soldiers. He is brought down by his own arithmetic, handed to a man above him who does not like being cheated. And there was no man in the world who liked being cheated less than Lucius Cornelius Sulla. But not tonight, and not first, because there was one thing I had to do before I turned predator, one debt older than Curtius and heavier than Rullus's ribs, and it would not wait, because the man it was owed to had a day, perhaps 2, before Sulla's patrols closed the last road out of Italy and the greatest soldier Rome ever made died in a ditch like a runaway slave. I had to get the old lion out of the city first. Titus knew where Marius was. Of course he did. There is a country under this city that the maps do not show, a country of old soldiers who served together 30 years ago and never entirely stopped, and Titus had a passport in it that Sulla's whole army could not revoke. He took me at the dead middle of the night to a tanner's loft hard against the river wall, up a ladder that stank of the trade, and there in the dark, on a pile of hides, was Gaius Marius. I had last seen him in a plain toga holding a room of 40 men in the palm of his hand. Now he was an old man in a borrowed cloak with 3 days of white stubble and dried mud to the knee, and for one moment my heart went out of me, because he looked like exactly what the board in the forum said he was, a hunted thing, worth 2 talents, running. Then he lifted his head and looked at me, and the eyes were the same, and I understood that the body was a disguise the man was wearing, and that inside it Gaius Marius was not hunted at all. He was waiting. The mortar boy. They put your name on the board too, then. Good. It means you are worth something at last. A ghost of the old blunt humor. Have you come to help me or to weep on me, because I have no use for the second? I've come to put you on a boat. We could not use a gate. Every gate on the landward side had a table and a clerk and a list, and Marius's face was known to half the soldiers in Italy. He had commanded their fathers. So we use the thing the gates were built to guard and everyone forgets to watch. The river. The dyer who had hidden me kept a flat mud scow he used to run bales down to the fullers at Ostia, a filthy low boat that no one looked at twice, because looking at it too long made your eyes water. And we laid Gaius Marius in the bottom of it under a load of raw fleeces soaking in stale piss and lime, because there is no sentry in the world who will dig with his hands through a cargo that smells like that. Titus poled. I sat in the bow with a fisherman's hat pulled down, a proscribed man ferrying a proscribed man past the walls of a city that wanted both our heads, and I have had more restful nights. The city slid by on both banks in the dark, close enough to touch and worse for being quiet. Patrols walked the wharves with torches. Twice a knot of them stood at the water's edge near enough that I heard them talking about the reward and what they would drink it on, while the current carried us past at the pace of a walking man, and I kept my head down, and my hands loose and my heart going like a hammer. Under the fleeces Marius did not move and did not speak, an old campaigner who knew that the surest way to get a hidden man killed is the hidden man himself. Only once very low did I hear him. It was not a complaint. It was a count. He was counting the bridges. The bridges were the danger. At the last one before the wall a patrol had a brazier and a chain across the water and they stopped us. I will not draw it out because it did not draw out, the worst moments never do. A young Optio came down the steps with a torch and told Titus to uncover the load. Titus, unhurried, said it was the fuller's wool for Ostia and lifted one corner of the reeking fleece with 2 fingers, and the smell rolled up off it into the torchlight. And the Optio's face did the thing every face does, and he stepped back and waved us on, and then a second man, older, a decurion who had not got old by trusting his nose, said hold, and put his own hand down into the wool to feel for what a clever man hides under a cargo no one will search. His fingers were a foot from Marius's face when Titus killed him. He did it the way he did everything, without noise and without waste. A soldier's knife up under the ear, one arm around the mouth, the whole of it over in the time it takes to describe the start of it. And I came up out of the bow and took the young Optio before the torch had finished falling. And this is the part I set down plainly because it is the part that is new. I did not fumble it. I got a hand over his mouth and my knee into the back of his and my other arm across his throat, the way Titus had drilled into me on 100 gray mornings, and I held a man's life shut in my arms in the dark until he stopped, and I felt it happen, and I did not let go and I did not look away and I did not, God help me, feel very much at all, which frightened me more afterward than the killing had. 2 sentries in the river and a boat past the last bridge, and a cold place opening in me where the horror should have been. We could not leave them on the boards. Titus had the chain off its post in 3 breaths. A decurion carries the key, and this one had no more use for it, and we slid both men over the side into the black water among the reeds where the river takes everything and asks nothing, weighted down with their own mail. My hands shook doing it and my voice did not, and I have noticed since that this is the order in which a man comes apart, the body first and the will last, and that if you can hold the will you can put the body back together afterward. A patrol on the far bank lifted a torch at the splash. Titus pulled us into the black shadow of the arch and held us there, dead still against the wet stone, while the torch swung across the water and found nothing but a reek of wool, and after 100 years it moved on. We pulled out through the water gate on the ebb tide, and no one raised the alarm behind us, because the 2 men who could have were face down in the reeds, and I sat in the bow with a dead man's blood drying on my forearms and understood that I had crossed a line I would not be crossing back over. At the coast, in the gray before dawn, a small ship stood off a mud beach with a Punic look to her, and a boat came in for 1 passenger. And there, with the sea sucking at the shingle, Gaius Marius came up out of the wool a last time and stood, and was the lion again, filth and all, and I appraised him because I cannot not, and I have never been sorrier that the bronze does not lie. Gaius Marius 70. Clients 84,000 scattered. Loyalty of Rome nil. Still the most dangerous man alive. The most dangerous man alive. Not was, is. And I knew why the bronze said it and he did not, because I knew what this filthy, hunted old man was going to do, that within the year he would come back over this same sea with fire in his hand, and turn his freed slaves loose in Rome, and stack the heads of better men on the forum platform until even his own side begged him to stop, and die in his bed a consul for the 7th time with the city too terrified to mourn him properly. I was putting a plague on a boat. I knew it. And I did it anyway, and I would do it again, because he had once said 4 words in a smoky room that changed my life, and because a debt is a debt, and because the man had put his hand on my shoulder when I was nothing. He gripped my arm at the wrist, soldier fashion, and he did not thank me, which was the highest thing he could have done. Listen to me, because I will not see you again, and this is worth more than the boat. They took your house. They took your hill. They put your name on a board. His grip tightened. There is one thing in this world they cannot take, boy, and it is the only thing that ever made me safe from men like the one hunting you. It is what an army thinks of you. Land can be seized and a name can be struck off, but you cannot proscribe a man 10,000 soldiers love. Become that, or run the rest of your life. Then he pressed something into my palm, small and cold, a thin, worn silver disc, a decoration off some field 40 years dead, and folded my fingers over it. There is a first spear named a run shipping east with Sulla's 5th. I pulled him out of a river in Africa when you were not born. Show him that, and say my name, and whatever board you are on he will find you a place in the line. It is the worst gift I have, a hard road to a hard trade. It is also the only one that ends with you alive. A last flicker of the old grin. You have the harder half already. Go and buy the rest in the one coin they cannot counterfeit. Then he was in the boat, and the boat was a shape on gray water, and then he was gone, and I stood on a cold beach with 2 men's deaths on my arms and a dead battle silver in my fist, and the whole shape of the rest of my life arranging itself in front of me, hard and clear and pointed at a war. I had come to get the old lion out. He had, in the going, handed me the map. Now I went back into the city to hunt. Aulus Curtius ran his killing out of a dead man's house. He had taken a fine one on the Caelian, an estate seized off some early name on the board, and turned it into a counting house for the proscriptions, a place where the plate and the coin and the deeds of the murdered came to be weighed and split before the state got its share and Curtius got his. It was well guarded, because a house full of other men's stolen money always is. And somewhere inside it, I knew, was the thing I actually wanted. Not the state's ledger, the honest one the clerks kept in the open, but the second one, the private one, where a greedy man cannot help writing down for his own eyes the true size of what he has skimmed. No man steals a fortune and trusts his memory to hold the tally. He writes it down. He cannot help it. And when they catch him, it is always the writing that hangs him. I could not take that house by force. 10 men and a wounded Rullus against a guarded depot in an occupied city is not a plan. It is a way of dying tidily. So I did not use force. I used the one thing I had already proven I could turn against a man, which is his own appetite. I fed Curtius a lie shaped like money. Through the same crooked channels his own tips came up. I let a rumor rise that a certain rich freedman, unlisted, unprotected, sitting on a strong room of uncounted gold 2 miles the wrong side of the river, was about to slip out of Italy, and that the man who reached him tonight, quietly ahead of the boards, would have the whole of it and no share to pay. It was exactly the kind of fat, deniable, off-the-books seizure a man who steals from Sulla lives for. I dressed the lie in enough true detail to cost me a week of what I'd learned, and I set the hour, and I waited to see if greed is as reliable as I have always found it to be. It is. It always is. At dusk Curtius took 6 of his best men and rowed for the river, and his counting house on the Caelian was left in the hands of a board guard captain and a skeleton watch, exactly as I had priced it. I appraised the captain over a wall as his master rode off, and the bronze told me how the night would have to go. Guard Captain Curtius's at the depot, body 15, board, paid, not loyal, will not die for another man's ledger, will not die for another man's ledger. Good. I did not need to beat these men. I needed to make standing still cost more than their wage was worth. The same lesson a torchlit yard had taught me a lifetime ago. And this time I was the one who came out of the dark instead of the one waiting in it. We went in over the garden wall in the last of the light. 8 of us and Titus, Rullus swearing behind us at being left with the horses, because his ribs would not let him climb. I went up the wall first this time first, where a season ago I could not have gone at all, and dropped into a laurel bed on the far side with a sentry 6 feet off and his back to me. I did not freeze. I took him the way I had taken the Optio on the river, a hand across the mouth and my weight where it had to be, and lowered him down quiet into the leaves while some part of me stood aside and watched my own hands do the work. 2 of the watch we took like that from behind, before they knew the night had teeth. The rest, when it came to it, did precisely what the ledger had promised. They saw hard men come out of the dark with a purpose, weighed a night's pay against a knife, and found the arithmetic simple. The captain himself I did not even have to fight. I put my back to a doorway with Titus's shoulder beside mine, and told him, flat and unhurried, that we had come for paper and not for lives, that his master was a thief who would let him hang before he'd share the rope, and that any man who walked out the gate now would still be alive to spend his wage in the morning. Most of them walked. It is a strange thing to watch your own hardest lesson work in your own mouth, and to feel doing it, the specific cold pleasure of a tool that has finally been ground sharp. The house was mine, and I read it the way I read everything. The open ledger sat on a clerk's table in plain sight, and it was worthless to me, all honest columns and state shares. But I have spent 2 lives learning where men hide the truth, and a man who has built a room to keep other people's money in has thought very hard about where to keep his own. I did not search the strong room. The strong room is where a thief expects to be searched. I stood in the middle of Curtius's private study and asked it the question I ask a failing job site: what here is more finished than it needs to be? And the answer was a writing shelf built a hand's breadth too deep for the wall behind it. The false back came away under Titus's knife. Behind it was a slim, greasy, much-handled book, and I opened it to a page of small, tight figures with no honest column anywhere among them, and I knew I was holding the rope that would hang Aulus Curtius. I felt the thing move that I had begun to be able to feel, not from a speech and not from a fight. From this, that I had drawn a plan in the dark and 8 men had walked into an armed house on the strength of it and come out the far side because it worked, because it was mine and it was good. That is a different weight than being obeyed in a brawl. That is being trusted with the whole of a thing before it happens. I had bought it with a year of standing in front, and I felt it settle into me in that stolen study like a coin dropping true into a slot. And then it cost me, because it always costs me, and this time the bill had a name. Curtius smelled the lie faster than a greedy man should. He was 2 miles out toward a strong room that did not exist when the wrongness of it caught up with him, and he turned his 6 back for the Calian at a gallop, and they came through the front of the house while we were going out the back with the book. It was quick, and it was bad, and it was in the dark, which is the worst kind blade work in a narrow corridor where numbers help neither side, and a man dies from a hand he never saw. One of Curtius's came at me with a short sword in the black of the passage, and I did the thing Titus had bruised into me, stepped inside the point instead of away from it, caught the arm at the wrist with both hands and drove it into the wall, and held it screaming there long enough for one of my own to put a knife in him. We went through the rest by main force and old drills and broke out into the garden, but it cost, the way it always costs. The youngest of us, the curly boy we had pulled off the hook in the Subura a month ago with the skin off his shins, went down at the wall with a man on his back, and I turned to go for him, and Titus put his whole weight into my chest and shoved me over the top. You have the book. The book is his life or 10 of ours. You go back for him, we all die here and the boy dies anyway. That is the sum and you know it. I knew it. That is the worst thing I can tell you about that night, that I did the arithmetic even then, even over the sound of a boy of ours going under, and the arithmetic was Titus's, and I made the cold call and left a man in Aulus Curtius's hands and rode. We got the ledger out. It was a real win. I had gone at the hunter and taken the one thing that could unmake him, and I had led men to do it, and it had worked. I let myself have that for exactly as long as it took to get across the river. Then I made myself look at the other half. Courteous had my proof and I had his, and he had one of mine, alive, who knew where the rest of us slept and what we meant to do, and a proscription man does not need much imagination to make a frightened boy talk. The clock had been long. Now it was very short. I was going to have to go and take my man back out of that house before morning. And this time there would be no lie clever enough to open the door. This time I was going to have to walk in and be enough, with my own hands, to bring him out. I found, testing it in the dark, that some cold part of me had been waiting a whole year to find out if I could. His name was Varus. He was 17, the same as me, a curly barefoot boy from the Subura who had followed me because I once pulled him out of a mob by the arm, and Aulus Curtius had him in a room with a brazier and a set of pincers, asking him where I slept. We had until the boy broke, which with a brazier is not long, and we had no cleverness left to spend. The lie was used up. Curtius knew someone had come for his ledger, and he had doubled his watch and drawn in his men, and lit his house against the dark, and there was no bait in the world that would draw him out of it a second time in one night. So we did the thing I had spent a year learning that money and cleverness cannot do. We went straight at it. 7 of us, and Titus, and Rullus, who came off his sickbed gray and swearing and buckled a belt over his cracked ribs, and told me in 4 words what he would do to me if I left him behind. We did not go over the garden wall this time. We came through the kitchen door off the mews at the back, where the deliveries came, because a house braced for an army at the front leaves a servant's door for one hard man with a bar, and Rullus was that man, ribs and all, and the door came off its hinges into the dark. And then I found out what a year had bought me. The first of them met me in the kitchen passage, a real guard this time, awake and armed and not for sale, and he came at me hard and I did not step back and I did not die. It is difficult to describe the thing that had happened to me without sounding as though I am boasting, so I will just say what it was. A year ago my body was a thing that happened to me. Now it was a thing I used. When the man cut at me, I was already not there. When he was overextended, I was already inside him, and I took his knife arm at the elbow the way Titus had made me take it 10,000 times, and I broke it over my own shoulder with a sound like green wood. And when he screamed, I put him down and did not think about it, and I was moving before he hit the floor. It was not strength. I will never be the biggest man in a room. It was that every reflex the drink had rotted had been rebuilt harder, in the cold, before dawn on purpose, until the man I used to be was gone, and this one stood in his place with another man's blood on his forearms and no shake in his hands at all. We fought our way through that house room by room, and I was in the front of it the whole way. In the atrium 3 of them tried to make a stand at the shallow rain pool, and it did not hold. Titus took the left of them with the cold economy of a man who has cleared 100 houses. Rullus took the right on will alone with his cracked ribs grinding audibly, and I went up the middle and put a man into the ornamental water with a hooked heel and a shove, and did not wait to watch him surface. It was not the Subura, where I had been a passenger in my own rescue, a thing my men dragged bleeding through a mob. This time the men behind me followed where I went, because where I went, men fell, and a following is a different animal when it is moving towards something behind you instead of carrying you away from it. I came into the brazier room last, and there was Varus tied to a chair with 2 fingers ruined, and over him, turning from the boy with a heated iron still in his fist, was the biggest man Aulus Curtius owned, a scarred slab of an ex-fighter he kept for exactly this, a head taller than me and half again as wide, the kind of man the year ago Marcus would have died in front of without landing a blow. He looked at me and he smiled, because he saw a lean boy in a doorway and he did the arithmetic every big man does, and his arithmetic was a year out of date. I will not pretend it was easy. He caught me once early, a clubbing blow off that iron that I did not fully slip, and it rang my skull and put me on the floor, and for a black moment I thought that was the whole of my new body's story, over in one exchange. But I got up. That was the difference. A year ago I do not get up. And he came at me again, sure of it now, a mountain of a man who had finished 100 fights with that first clubbing blow and had never once in his life needed a second. Which was the whole of his mistake, because he came on like a man swatting a fly, and I had stopped being a fly. I gave him the room instead of meeting the rush, let the heated iron whistle past my ear close enough to feel it singe, and while his weight was still committed forward past me, I stopped trying to fight a giant like a giant, and I fought him like a job. I took his knee from the outside, where a knee does not go, all my weight dropping through it with the doorframe braced behind my shoulder, the way you lever a stone too big to lift, and the giant came down to my height, and at my height, on the floor in the dark, a hard year of Titus Rufio was worth more than all his reach. I got behind him. I got my forearm under his jaw and my knee into his spine, and I held the biggest man in the house shut in my arms the way I had held the Optio on the river. And this time I felt the whole of it, and I did not look away, and God forgive me, I did not want to. He stopped. I let him down. And the ledger which had scored my body at 8 for one entire year of my life while the rest of me clawed up off the floor, finally moved. Marcus Varenius, 17. Body 8 to 10. Earned in blood at last. No longer a body that other men must carry. 10. It is not a large number. A real soldier scores higher, and I would meet men who scored double it and worse. But I had lived at 8 so long that 8 had become the shape of me, the drunk boy's ruined gift, the joke the bronze told to my face every time I dared to hope. And now it said 10, and it said earned, and I stood in a torturer's room with a giant unconscious at my feet and a rescued boy weeping behind me, and I felt, for one clean bright second, the specific joy of a thing you were told you could never have and took anyway with your own 2 hands. And under the joy in the same breath, the cold thing. Because I had noticed what I noticed and I could not unnotice it. I had not wanted to look away. Somewhere in the last year between the dolphin floor and this brazier, a hard and quiet man had been assembling himself inside me out of drills and dead centuries and cold arithmetic. And tonight I had met him fully for the first time, and the frightening thing was not that he was a killer. The frightening thing was that he was calm. He was good at it. Some part of me that had been useless and ashamed my whole life had finally found a thing it was made for, and it was this, and it did not flinch. And I did not know yet whether that made me a man who could survive Rome or a man Rome had finally finished making into one of its own. We cut Varus loose and carried him out through a house full of men who had discovered, that night, that the mortar boy was not what the board said he was. The boy could not stop shaking and would not let go of my arm, and I did not make him. Rullus looked at me once over the top of his head, gray-faced and bleeding from the ribs, the same flat look he had given me the morning he first cleaned my shovel without being asked. A hard man taking a new measure of another and finding, this time, that the numbers had changed. Curtius himself we did not find. He had gone out a window at the first crash of the kitchen door, a clever, greedy man who knew to the ounce the exact moment his own arithmetic turned against him, and I let him run, because I did not need to kill Aulus Curtius. I had his ledger, and now I had my man, and I had something else besides, something I had walked into that house not sure I owned and walked out of it certain of. I had a body that would answer when I called it. It had taken a year and a war and a boy's ruined hand to buy, and it was the cheapest thing I had ever gotten in this city, because it was the one thing no one could put on a board and take away. Now, I had the proof to unmake my death, and the hands to defend it while I did. It was time to stop being a hunted man with a stolen book, and become something Sulla's Rome would have to reckon with on purpose. It was time to go and sell a tyrant the one thing he could not win his war without. A man on a kill list does not get an audience. He gets a knife. So I did not try to buy my way to power with money, which power already had by the shipload, or with pleading, which power despises. I went with the 3 things I had that Sulla's Rome actually wanted and could not simply take: a stolen ledger, a dead war's silver disc, and a hill that turned water into stone. The disc came first. I found a runs where Marius said he would be, in the churn of a camp mustering to sail, a primus pillis of the fifth, gray as iron, with a first spear's way of standing still in a moving crowd. He looked at the thin, worn silver in my palm, and something moved behind his face that 30 years had not worn out, and he did not ask how I came by it, because a man does not ask that. He asked one thing. He got out, the old man, he is alive. I put him on the boat myself. That bought me everything the disc promised and more. Aruns owed Gaius Marius his life out of an African river 40 years gone, and the coin of that debt did not spend on me, a proscribed boy he had never met. It spent on the man I had carried to the water. He took me into the camp on his own word, and it was the longest walk of my life. Sulla's army was everywhere around us. Tens of thousands of the men who had crossed a boundary. No army had crossed in 800 years and had not been struck down for it. And I walked through the middle of them, a proscribed Marian worth 2 talents, past 3 clerks' tables where my own name sat on a board within arm's reach of soldiers who would have opened my throat for the reward, and called it a good morning's work. I kept my eyes level and my step even and my whole life balanced on a first spear's word and a scrap of a dead man's silver, and Aruns warned me the entire way, low and steady, what I was walking into. The tent of the one man in Sulla's army sharp enough to see exactly what I was worth, and cold enough to have me killed anyway the instant the sum came out wrong. Lucius Lucullus was Sulla's quaestor, which is to say he was the man who turned Sulla's war into ships and grain and pay, and he was perhaps 30 and looked at me across a camp table cluttered with the accounts of an invasion the way you look at an unexpected line in a ledger. Not with warmth, not with malice, only with the wish to know quickly whether the number was an error or an opportunity. I appraised him while he did it, and the bronze told me I had 1 throw and no second. Lucius Lucullus, Sulla's quaestor, reckoning 84, cunning 70. Loyalty to Sulla, total, cannot be bought, once the impossible done, and the credit for it cannot be bought, once the impossible done. So I did not offer him a bargain, and I did not offer him mortar, which is what a lesser man would have heard me offering. I had learned that lesson in a smoky room from Marius a year ago and paid for it in front of Vedius, and I did not make it twice. I spoke to the thing the ledger showed me under the accounts, the hunger of a brilliant man to be the one who did what could not be done. You are going to take ship for the east, and somewhere out there you are going to stand in the mud in front of the harbor forts of the Greek cities Piraeus, and the others, the strongest walls in the world, built out into the sea where no ram will reach them and no sap can go under them. And ordinary Roman engineering is going to sit in that mud and watch them laugh at it. And the siege is going to eat your season and your grain and your reputation. And the credit for the delay will have your name on it, because the money and the works are yours. I let that land. He did not tell me to stop, which from a man like that is a shout of encouragement. I make a stone that sets hard under water. I can lay you a mole across open sea that no storm breaks. I can float a siege platform where the wall builders swore the water would protect them forever. I can hand you the ports that cannot be taken, and hand you, with them, the name of the man who took what could not be taken. That is what I am selling, not sand. The impossible thing done with your name on it. There was a silence in that tent that I have learned to love, the silence of a very clever man redrawing his own map. And into it, before he could speak, before he could remember that the map had a dead man's name written across the middle of it, I played the second card, because a man weighing whether to trust you is halfway to yours already, and the way to close it is to hand him something that costs you to give and proves what you are. And because I would sooner you owed me a service than a gift freely, your master licensed a knight named Aulus Curtius to seize the estates of the proscribed for the treasury. Curtius has been robbing that treasury blind, skimming the dead before Rome can count them, for months. This is his own private tally in his own hand. I set the greasy little book on the accounts of the invasion. Recover what he stole, break him. And remember which proscribed man walked into your tent, and handed you a thief instead of asking for his life. He picked up the little book and did not open it, and looked at me over it for a long, level moment. You are a proscribed man who helped Gaius Marius flee the city. Do not trouble to deny it. I can read a river crossing off a patrol that never reported in as well as you read a wall. By every law my master has written, I should have you killed where you stand and keep all 3 of your gifts for the price of nothing. He set the book down flat. Tell me why I do not. Because a dead man builds you no harbors. Kill me and you have a hill you cannot work, a thief you would have caught in a month anyway, and a lost season in the mud at Piraeus with your name on the loss. Spare me and you have the ports of the east and a man who owes you his life. You are not a cruel man, Quester. You are a correct one. Do the sum. It only comes out one way and we both already know which. Something almost like a smile touched him then, the driest thing I have ever seen cross a Roman's face, and I knew I had him, not his liking, which I would never have, but his arithmetic, which was worth a great deal more. I watched Lucius Lucullus do, in the space of 10 heartbeats, the same cold sum I would have done, and arrive where I had arrived because clever men all end at the same place if you lay the road straight enough. A dead engineer was 2 talents and a looted hill. A living one who could take the untakeable ports and had just handed him the head of a man robbing his master was worth immeasurably more, and cost only a name struck off a board that had 1,000 names on it and would not miss one small one. He did not thank me. He did the thing power does when it has decided you are useful, which is worse and better than thanks. He began at once to spend me. Your name comes off the lists tonight. I have the pen for it and the reason now to use it. The hill and its trade stay yours. I have no wish to own a mystery I cannot work myself. I wish to buy its fruit at the army's price first and always. He was already writing. And you do not sell me stone from a safe distance, Varenius. A man does not lay a mole under the walls of Piraeus from a villa in Latium. You come. You come east with the works under a soldier's commission, and you build the impossible where I can watch you do it, or the offer is smoke, and so, in a month, are you. Those are the terms. There is no version where you keep your head and your hill and stay home. And there it was, the hook inside the rescue, the price folded into the gift, exactly as Crassus had once folded it, and exactly as I should have expected, because that is the only shape a real offer ever comes in. I had walked into that tent to buy my life with concrete. I walked out having sold my life to a war, a commission in the army of the man who had driven my mentor into the sea, sailing east to build harbors for a cause I despised, because it was that or a knife, and because, God help me, it was also the exact rung Marius had told me on a cold beach I would have to climb. I was off the board. I was alive. I had a soldier's commission and a whole ocean between me and the men in Rome who wanted me dead. I would learn before the fleet even sailed that an ocean is not far enough, and that a commission you did not choose is only a grave someone else has dug in advance and told you to march toward. But that night, walking out of Sulla's camp, a free man passed the tables that had wanted my head an hour before. I let myself feel the whole size of what I had done. I had been a name on a kill list at dawn. By dark I was an officer in the greatest army in the world, with my hill still mine and my head still on it, having paid for all of it not in blood or coin, but in the one thing I had that no one else in Rome could make. Marius was right. They could not proscribe a man the war could not do without, so I had made myself into one. There was one problem left in the whole arrangement, and it was the hill. I was sailing to a war on the far side of the world for years, not months, and a hill that turns water into stone does not run itself. Someone had to hold it while I was gone, quarry the Pozzolana, keep Davis's crews mixing, ship the stuff to Lucullus's army wherever the war washed up, and hardest of all, defend it. Because a valuable thing owned by an absent man is not an asset, it is bait. Every enemy I had made in 2 years would come for that hill the day my sail dropped below the horizon, and I would be 1,000 miles away building moles for the man who had proscribed me, unable to lift a finger. I needed a partner with reach and capital, and the particular cold ruthlessness to hold a fortune through a civil war. There was exactly one such man in Rome, and a year ago I had looked him in his mild and terrible face and refused him. So I went back to Crassus. That is its own kind of victory, and I let myself taste it on the walk there. The last time we spoke I had been the mortar boy with a hill and no protection, refusing his roof to keep my source my own, and he had filed me away with the patience of weather and said we would speak again. We always do. Now I came to him off the kill list, an officer of the Eastern War, a man Lucius Lucullus had struck clean with his own pen, and I came not as a supplicant begging a roof, but as a man with an asset the army itself now had a stake in, looking to place it in good hands on my own terms. He received me as if no time had passed, mild and balding and plainly dressed, remembering the names of my remaining men before I had finished sitting down. I appraised him, and the bronze had changed one line, and the changed line was the sweetest thing I had read in a year. Marcus Licinius Crassus, 27, reckoning 88, threat, v malice, none, now weighs you as a near equal, still weather. A near equal, not an equal. I would not be his equal for 20 years if ever, but no longer prey, no longer a boy with a marvel he was too small to keep. He had repriced me, the way Bashews once repriced me, and that repricing was worth more to my safety than a wall of soldiers. I laid it out plainly, because you do not dress a proposal for a man who can see through cloth. He would manage the hill in my absence and guard it as his own, his men, his money, his reach standing between my operation and every jackal in a burning city. He would sell its stone to the army at Lucullus's standing price, and take a fair share for the holding of it, a good share, more than I wanted to give and less than the thing was worth to me sailing away from it. And here was the whole of the cleverness, the single sentence I had built the deal around. He could not own it. Not in 2 years, not in 10. Because the source was now written into the accounts of Sulla's war as the property of the officer who could make it work, and not even Marcus Crassus reaches into the ledgers of the army that owns Rome and quietly moves a line. The one appetite in the world too large for him to swallow was the state's, and I had put the state between his teeth and my hill. He tested it once, because a man like that tests everything. States change their minds, Varenius. Sulla will not live forever. The pen that struck your name can be struck in its turn. A contract is only paper once the man behind it is ash. What holds your wall up the day your quester is dead? The stone itself. Whoever holds Rome after Sulla will need harbors and walls no less than he does more, after a war eats the old ones. A hill that builds the unbuildable is useful to every regime that will ever sit on this city, and a thing that is useful to whoever wins is a thing every one of them protects. I have not tied my hill to one man's pen. I have tied it to the one need that outlasts all of them. That wall does not fall when Sulla falls. It falls the day Rome stops needing harbors, and Rome will still be building harbors when you and I are dust. He was quiet a moment, and then he nodded slowly, the way a master craftsman nods at a joint well cut. And the mild eyes did a thing I had not seen them do before, which was to show, for half a heartbeat, something almost like respect, the specific pleasure a man who prices everything takes in being priced right back, and walled out cleanly, by someone who has finally learned the trade. You have grown teeth, Varenius. A year ago I offered you a roof and you would not come under it. Now you build me one I cannot buy my way past and hand me the key to the door and not the house. A rare, dry warmth. It is a good deal. I will keep your hill alive and I will make us both money, and one day, not soon, you have arranged that much, we will find out which of us the state loves more. We will speak again. We clasped hands on it, and it was done, and my life's work was as safe as anything can be in a city coming apart, held for me by the most dangerous man in the world precisely because I had made it not quite worth his while to steal. And then, walking out, the cold thing came, the way it always comes with Crassus, uninvited and precise, because I knew what was riding toward this mild man over the horizon. Sulla would sail east, and behind him the wheel would turn again, and Marius, The old lion I had put on a boat with my own hands would come back over that sea with fire, and in the terror that followed, this courteous balding man would lose his father and his brother to the proscriptions of my own side, and flee for his life to a cave in Spain, and come back harder than iron. I had just shaken the hand of a man I knew was about to be gutted by the very cause I had risked everything to serve, and I could not say one word of it, and I found that I did not much want to, and that frightened me the ordinary amount now, which is to say not enough. I had left my hill in the hands of a man the coming year would break. It was, God help me, still the safest place for it. That is the kind of arithmetic Rome had taught me to do without flinching, and I did it, and I went to see to the rest of my affairs before the fleet sailed. There was my little army to divide, and that cut harder than any deal with Crassus. I could not take them all to a war, and would not have wanted to. So I split the thing I had bled a year to build. Davis would stay and run the mixing, the quiet Greek genius who was the true heart of the whole marvel and worth more than any 10 of us. And to hold the hill itself, to stand between it and the jackals with a free hand, and the whole of my authority I gave to Rullus. It was the highest thing I had to give, and we both knew it. I was handing the man his own command, the source of everything, mine in law and his to defend, the one thing on this earth I could not replace, put into the hands of the one man I would trust with it over my own brother. He did not thank me, and he did not argue. He was still gray from the ribs and would not have lasted a year of marching, and we both knew that too, and neither of us said it, because there are kinder lies than the truth between men who have carried each other bleeding. He only took my forearm in the soldier's grip he had learned from watching Titus, and said one thing. I stayed in that yard to see how it ended with a master who stands in front. So go and stand in front of a war. I'll keep your hill standing till you come back and tell me how it went. Titus sailed with me. Of course Titus sailed with me. You do not send a man to learn a trade and leave the teacher at home. And Varus would not be left, ruined hand and all, and a handful of the other hard men chose the sea over the safety of the hill, and that was my war band, such as it was. A broken-nosed officer not yet 18, a two-fingered veteran, a tortured boy, and a few men who had decided somewhere in a year of running that they would rather follow me into a war than stand on a hill and watch me sail into one alone. That left one thing. There was a debt still open in this city, wearing a knight's ring and a freedman's cap. Before I sailed, I meant to close it. Aulus Curtius I did not have to touch. I had handed him to a machine far larger and colder than anything I could build, and I only had to stand in the crowd and watch it work. Sulla's Rome forgave many things. It forgave murder if the murdered man was on a board. It forgave theft if you stole from the dead. The one thing it did not forgive was stealing from Sulla, and Aulus Curtius had spent months skimming the proscriptions of the man who owned Rome, and had been fool enough to write it down. Lucullus took that little greasy book and did with it exactly what I had promised myself he would. Within a week Curtius's own name went up on the very boards he had used to kill other men, the prescriber proscribed, his estate seized, his skimmed fortune clawed back into the treasury he had robbed, his throat, in the end, worth 2 talents to whichever of his own former men reached him first. I stood in the forum crowd and read his name on the white board with my hood up, the way I had read my own not 2 months before, and I felt nothing I am proud of and nothing I am ashamed of either. I felt the cold satisfaction of a sum that has finally balanced. He had priced my hill and put me on a list to take it. Now he was a line struck through in the treasury's favor, and my hill, the seizure void, the paperwork rotten with his crime, my name clean, was mine again in law, held safe on the Sabine slope by a man with cracked ribs and my whole trust. The machine had eaten the night, but the machine could not give me the freedman, because the machine did not care about him, and I did. Rufus Scipio was mine. He had pointed soldiers at my bed in the dark. He had stood in my own yard with 100 hired men and enjoyed it. He had guided the raid that took my house and named my name to the men who came to kill me and expected to grow fat on my ruin. He was not a large man in the scheme of the city. He never had been, But he was the door my enemies had walked through twice, and I was about to put a whole ocean between myself and everyone I loved, and I was not going to leave that door standing open behind me. I found him at his hauling yard on the Esquiline, packing to run. Curtius's fall had cut his last string, and a padrone with no patron is just a fat man with enemies, and he knew it. He was loading a cart in the dusk with 2 frightened cousins and everything he could carry when I walked in through his own gate with Titus at my shoulder and Varus at the other, and he turned, and he saw me, and I watched a year of arithmetic finish behind his eyes. He had known me as 3 men in his time. He had known the drunk son, a thing to be shoved aside in a doorway. He had known the mortar boy, a jumped-up nuisance to be taught his place with 100 hired sticks. And he had known the proscribed fugitive, a name on a board worth 2 talents to whoever dragged it in. He had never once met the man who came through his gate that dusk, quiet, unhurried, no fear anywhere on him, a soldier at each shoulder, and I watched him try to fit this 4th man into the 3 he knew and fail and begin, for the first time in the whole of our long acquaintance, to be genuinely afraid. I appraised him once for the last time. Rufus Scipio, Halyer's padrone, cunning 44, patron gone, men gone, no longer a wall, barely a door, no longer a wall. On the Sabine Road 2 years ago the ledger had called this man a wall, a thing I could not get past, a squat freedman who could have me knifed with a word. Now it barely called him a door. Nothing about Rufus Scipio had changed. Everything about me had. He did the thing cornered rats do. He tried the grovel first. I had never done him wrong. It was all courteous. He had a family. He could be useful to a great man like me now. He knew every carter and every road in Latium, and would I not want such a man? And on, the same mouth that had laughed at me in my own yard now running like a cut drain. And when he saw in my face that the grovel was buying him nothing, he did the other thing, because a rat that cannot beg will bite. He came off the cart with a hauling hook in his fist, fast for a fat man, aiming to open my throat and run in the confusion. A year ago that would have killed me. That is the whole point of everything I have written down. It did not kill me. I was not where the hook came, because I had read his shoulders before his arm moved, the way Titus had bruised into me on 100 mornings. And when he was committed and passed me, I took the hook arm at the wrist and turned it the way you turn any lever, and I heard the wrist go, and the hook rang on the cobbles, and then I put Rufus Scipio down against the wheel of his own laden cart, and I held him there. His cousins did not move. Titus had made very sure with nothing but his stance that they would not. I did not gloat. I want that set down because it is the truest and the coldest thing about the man I had become. There was no speech, no list of his crimes read back to him, none of the hot satisfaction I had imagined on 100 bad nights. There was only the arithmetic. He was a man who had sold me twice and would sell me a 3rd time the day it paid, and I was leaving everyone I loved unguarded behind me for years, and an open door is an open door. I closed it. I did it myself with my own hands, and I felt the calm come down over me while I did the same flat calm from the river and the brazier, the quiet, capable thing that had been assembling inside me for a year, and it did not shake. And afterward I stood up in the dusk of his ruined yard and understood that I had crossed the last of whatever lines were left to cross. Titus put a hand on my shoulder, not to comfort me, to turn me toward the gate, the way you turn a soldier away from a thing that is finished so he does not stand and look at it. It needed doing and you did it clean. Don't stand in it. Standing in it is how the good ones go bad, not the doing, the standing in it after. Come away. I came away. The debts were closed, both of them, the knight to the machine and the freedman to me. My name was off every board in Rome. My hill was mine and safe, and pouring out its gray fortune into Crassus's careful hands and the army's endless need. My enemies in this city were a dead knight and a dead freedman and a brother too gelded to matter, and I had a commission and a warband and a body that answered, and a whole ocean waiting to carry me away from all of it. I should have felt safe. I had spent 2 years building toward exactly this hour, and I stood in it clean at last, and what I felt walking back to the fleet through the occupied city was the opposite of safe, because I had learned the shape of this by now. Every single time I had climbed a rung in this city, the view from the new height had shown me a bigger drop. I had survived being nobody and it made me visible. I had survived being visible and it made me hunted. Now I had survived being hunted and made myself into an officer of Rome's greatest army. And somewhere out ahead of me, in a war I had bought my way into, there would be men who had watched a proscribed Marian slip the net and sail east wearing a commission, and who would take that personally, and who had a whole campaign's worth of quiet, deniable, arithmetic ways to make sure I never sailed home. I did not know their names yet, and I did not need to. I had spent 2 years learning that in this city there is always a hand you have not seen, moving a piece you did not know was in play, and that the higher you climb the better hidden the hand. Somewhere out ahead of me, in the fleet mustering at the coast, in a tent I had not yet entered, in a dispatch already sailing ahead of my own ship, my fine new commission was being quietly reshaped into something with my death folded into the middle of it. I could feel it coming the way an old soldier feels weather in a bad knee. I did not know the shape of it. I only knew it was there, and that I was about to sail straight into it with my eyes open, because there was no longer any road that did not run through a war. I had closed every door in Rome. I was about to walk through a much larger one, and I had the cold suspicion, buckling on a soldier's kit for the first time in my life, that someone had already arranged for it to lock behind me. Orlia came to me the morning I left Rome, which she had no business doing and did anyway. I was in the yard of the inn where my band had gathered, checking a mule's load in the gray light, when I looked up and she was in the gate, a patrician woman of a solvent house, alone but for one maid, standing in a common inn-yard where a proscribed man's leavings were packing for a war, which is the sort of thing that gets a woman talked about in the houses that had made her. She had risked her neck to send me a killer's name across an occupied city, and now she risked her name to say goodbye, and I understood, looking at her, that the girl who had once pitied the drunk in the doorway had made some decision about me that neither of us had said aloud, and neither of us was going to say aloud that morning. I went to her. I did not know what to say to her. I have never known what to say to her. It is the one arithmetic I have never been able to do. They are all saying you bought your way off the boards with a miracle and a bribe. I told them it was neither. I told them you handed Equestra a thief and made yourself worth more than your own death. Her violet eyes went over me, the changed shoulders, the soldier's belt, the thing in my face that a year had put there. I was right about you when no one else was, Marcus. I was right when you were a ruin in a doorway and everyone else had written you off. Do me the courtesy of not dying in some Greek harbor and making a liar of me. I have no intention of dying to prove a lady wrong. It was not enough, and we both knew it, and there was a moment there in the gray inn-yard where the whole unspoken weight of it stood between us, that I was sailing for years into a war, that she was staying in a Rome I knew was about to tear itself apart a second time, that I could not protect her from 1 hour of what was coming, and could not even tell her it was coming, that whatever this was between us, it had been born at exactly the wrong moment in the worst possible city. She did not reach for me, and I did not reach for her. She only pressed something small into my hand, a plain iron ring worth nothing, off her own finger, and closed my fingers over it the way Marius had closed my fingers over a dead man's silver. So you have something of Rome to bring back to it. Come back, Marcus. That is the whole of what I came to say. Then she was gone, before either of us could ruin it with more words, and I put an iron ring worth nothing into the pouch beside a silver disc worth nothing, and found that I was carrying now the 2 heaviest things I owned. The coast was 3 days south, and the fleet was a forest. I had never seen anything like it. Hundreds of ships riding at anchor, the machine of an invasion, thousands of soldiers and the whole apparatus of a war being loaded aboard, grain and mules and catapults and men, the largest single thing human hands had built that I had ever stood next to. It was bound for Greece, and past Greece for a king. Mithridates of Pontus had risen against Rome, and in a single ordered day, had tens of thousands of Roman citizens across Asia dragged from their houses and killed. And this whole floating machine existed to make him answer for it, to cross the sea, break the Greek cities that had gone over to him, and storm the harbor forts of Athens and its port at Piraeus, where the strongest walls in the world stood with their feet in the water. That was the war Lucullus had bought me into. Somewhere out past that forest of masts was a siege that ordinary engineering could not win, and a hill in Latium that could, and me in the middle of it, sailing, whether they liked it or not, straight toward the exact problem I had been born to solve. My band and I were 3 days late finding our place in it, and it was in the finding of our place that I learned what had been done to me. Aruns found it first. He was a first spear of 30 years. He could read a muster roll the way I read a wall, and he read mine, and his weathered face did a thing I did not like. "This is wrong, boy. This is not the posting the quester gave you," he tapped the wax. "You were to go to the works, to the harbor trains under Lucullus's own eye, where your stone matters and a man is worth keeping alive. This says otherwise. This says you are a military tribune with no engineers, no works, and no command that means anything, seconded to a forlorn cohort on the far right of the whole line, the anvil, we call it, the place you put the men you have already decided to lose. Someone has been into the rolls after the quester signed them. Someone has moved you from the safe place he put you to the exact place a man goes to die, and dressed it up as an honor so you cannot refuse it without looking a coward. There it was, cleaner than a knife and twice as deniable. They could not kill me in Rome anymore. I was off the boards. I was Lucullus's useful man. So they had done the one thing left to them, which was to let the war kill me, and hand me a fine-sounding rank while it did. A tribune who is a tribune in name only, with no men who must obey him and every danger that can find him, posted to the losing corner of a siege, is not an officer. He is a target that has been told to march toward the arrows and thank the men who sent him. And I did not have to wonder long who had done it, because he had come down to the ships himself to watch me read it. Lucius Fuscus was a sullen military tribune of good family and no particular gift, one of Curtius's old ring of friends who had grown fat on the proscriptions I had helped end, and he had arranged himself against a bollard to enjoy my mourning. I appraised him, and the bronze was blunt. Lucius Fuscus, sullen tribune, reckoning 40, cunning 55, malice, much, ordered to spend you, means to enjoy it, ordered to spend you. Not a weather system, this one, not a Crassus, dangerous without wanting anything. This was a small vicious man of the kind Rome makes by the thousand, given a piece of my life to break by men above him who wanted a Marian dead and their own hands clean. He strolled over all courtesy and told me in the language such men use, congratulations. A fine posting, a chance to prove my new loyalty. The right flank was where reputations were made, every word of it a knife wrapped in a compliment, watching my face for the fear. He did not find it. That is the thing they never understand, the Fuscuses of the world, because they have never been where I have been. A man who has woken up in a stranger's dying body and clawed himself off a mosaic floor and out from under 400,000 sesterces of debt, and off a proscription list, and out of a torturer's house does not frighten easily at the promise of a hard posting. I let him finish. Then I told him, quite pleasantly, that I looked forward to serving on the right flank, and that I had noticed something in my 2 lives about the men who arrange other men's deaths from behind bollards, which was that the war very rarely respects their arrangements, and that he should perhaps not spend all of my estate in his head before the campaign had even sailed. The malice flickered just once behind the courtesy. Good. I wanted him to know that I knew. A hidden enemy is a danger. An enemy who knows you have seen him is a man who has to start being careful, and careful men make the mistakes that bold ones do not. Titus had listened to the whole of it beside me with a soldier's stone face, and when Fuscus had gone he spat, once and precisely, into the man's boot prints. I have served under a dozen of that kind. They spend better men than him and write it up as glory when the fighting's done. He shouldered his kit. There is only one answer to it, boy, and you already know it, because it is the same answer as everything else. Be the story they cannot write the way they meant to. I walked back to my band with the poisoned orders in my fist and a strange, cold, rising thing in my chest that I recognized, after a moment, as something almost like joy. Because they had made a mistake, the men above Fuscus, the faceless, sullen faction that wanted the jumped-up Marion dead. They had not killed me. They had done the one thing worse than leaving an enemy alive, which is to leave him alive and hand him, gift-wrapped, the exact circumstance in which he might become the thing they most feared. Marius had told me on a cold beach that they could not proscribe a man an army loved. They were about to post me to the one corner of the war where a man either dies in a week or does something the whole army cannot stop talking about. They thought they were digging my grave. They were, without knowing it, building my stage. We sailed on the morning tide, and I stood at the stern rail and watched Italy go down into the sea. It is a strange thing to leave a country. The coast shrinks and thins, and then it is a gray line, and then it is nothing. Just water and the smell of it. And everything you have ever been is on the far side of that horizon getting smaller. I had come to that coast a proscribed man in another boy's ruined body with 2 dead centuries on my conscience. I left it an officer of Rome, standing at the rail of a warship with a soldier's belt at my waist and a body that answered when I called it, sailing to a war under my own flag. 6 days into Sulla's Rome, the boots had come up the street for me in the dark. Now I went out past the same walls that had wanted my head, upright in the light on purpose. That is a distance no map measures, and I had covered it in 1 hard year, and I let myself feel the whole size of it exactly once at that rail before I put it away, because a man who stops to admire the ground he has taken is a man who has stopped taking ground. The ship began teaching me my place in it before the coast was even gone. I was an officer on paper and a landsman in fact, packed into a warship's waist with my handful of men and a great many other men's, and I learned inside the first hour that a tribune the army has decided to lose is birthed no better than the rancors it has decided to spend. Titus took to it like the old campaigner he was, found us a dry corner out of the wind, talked a fair share of the rations off men twice our number by sheer flat certainty, and set about at once teaching Varus and the others the 1,000 small brutal skills that keep a man alive on a campaign. How to sleep sitting up, how to keep a blade from rusting in salt air, how to be invisible to an officer hunting someone to flog. I watched him work and understood that my schooling was not finished. It had only changed masters from the man who taught me to build to the man who would teach me to survive being built into a weapon. Then I made myself look back at what I was leaving, because you should always know the price of a thing while you are still close enough to see it. I was leaving my sister in a hill farm and my hill in a wounded man's hands and my brother gelded in a house full of masks, and I was leaving all of them in a city I knew was about to burn a second time. Sulla would sail east behind me, and the wheel would turn, and Marius, the old lion I had carried to the water, would come back over this same sea with fire, and the terror I had just escaped by joining the winning side would fall on everyone I could not carry with me. Crassus would lose his father and his brother to it. Orlia would stand in the middle of it with an iron ring's twin still on her finger, and I would be 1,000 miles away building harbors for the men who had proscribed me, unable to lift a hand. I had climbed up out of the fire by making myself too useful to burn. I had not been able to lift anyone up the ladder behind me. That is the part they do not tell you about rising in this world, that you rise alone, and you leave the people you rose for standing in the dark at the bottom, and you sail away, and you call it winning. And I was sailing toward a war that had been arranged to kill me. Somewhere out past the water was Piraeus, and the strongest walls in the world with their feet in the sea, and a siege that ordinary Rome could not win, and me, posted to the worst corner of it by small men who wanted a Marion dead and their hands clean. Lucius Fuscus was 3 ships back with his orders and his malice, waiting for the war to do his work for him. I had no engineers, no command that meant anything, and a rank that was a joke someone had made at my funeral before I was dead. I had everything else, though. I had Titus and Varus, and a handful of men who had chosen the sea over safety. I had a hill in Latium that could build the one thing this war could not win without, and a quester who knew it, whatever the muster rolls said. I had a mind that priced everything and a body that had finally learned to fight, and a year's education in exactly how far a determined man can carry himself in Rome starting from nothing at all. And I had the two heaviest things I owned, a dead general's silver and a living woman's iron, in a pouch against my heart. And I was already, God help me, at work on the problem, because that is the one thing about me that no dolphin floor and no proscription and no poison posting had ever managed to switch off. Fuscus and his faction had barred me from the works, where my stone would have made me safe and useful and forgotten. They had not understood what they were doing. They had taken the one man in that fleet who could read a siege the way an engineer reads a failing job site, and dropped him not into the safe rear, but into the bloody front, where everything is decided and everything is seen. A man at the harbor works is a clerk with a trowel. A man on the anvil who finds a way to matter is a man the whole army watches matter. I did not yet know how I would do it, whether it would be the stone after all, worked into the fight some way they had not thought to forbid, or the men, or the mind, or all three at once the way I had taken Curtius's house. But I knew, with the flat certainty I had learned to trust over any hope, that a war is the most disordered thing men make, and that disorder was precisely the country I had spent 2 lives learning to read. They had thrown me into the chaos to drown me. They did not know that chaos was the one water I could swim. The ledger closed the year the way it had closed every year of this strange second life, with the plain account, and for the first time the account read like a man going somewhere instead of a man barely surviving where he was. Marcus Varenius 17. Body 8 to 10. Command 4 to 5. Struck from the boards, a soldier now. Sailing, open-eyed, into the grave dug for him, a soldier now. In episode after episode, the bronze had told me what I was not strong, not obeyed, not safe, not free. This time it told me what I had become, and what I had become was a man with a body and a following and a purpose, sailing under arms toward the exact place a nobody either dies forgotten or does the thing that no faction, no proscription, no small vicious tribune can ever take back. He becomes, in front of an entire army, undeniable. Behind me, in the waist of the ship, Titus was already asleep against a coil of rope with a soldier's gift for stealing rest wherever it lies. Varus was cleaning a blade with his ruined hand and getting better at it by the hour. The handful of men who had chosen the sea over the safety of the hill were finding their places among strangers, and not one of them yet knew what I meant to make of us out there past the water. That was all right. Neither did the small men who had sent us east to die. I had a whole voyage to decide it, and a war to do it in. Marius had told me on a cold beach that they could not proscribe a man 10,000 soldiers loved. I had spent a year making myself unkillable in Rome. Now I was going to spend the next several making myself something far more dangerous than that, in front of the men whose love was the one currency my enemies could not counterfeit, seize, or strike from a board. They had sent me east to die on the anvil. I intended to come back off it as the hammer. The Italian coast went under the sea behind me. Ahead there was only water, and past the water a war, and past the war the whole of everything I meant to become. I turned my back on the country that had tried 3 times now to bury me, and faced the open sea, and for the first time in 2 lives I was not running from anything. I was marching toward it.